Farm County Landmarks, we welcome you. On behalf of the DRLA Culture Center, we welcome you. I've been connected with the center ever since it opened. Give you a little bit of brief history about the center, since we are historic landmarks, Fountain County, sort of. We used to be Fountain County Landmarks. I always mess that up. This was the home of the Boo family. The Boo family ran a railroad hotel here in Petersburg around the turn of the century. They were having a hard time making ends meet. They had some land down south that they swapped for some land in Illinois, and whoop, that land in Illinois struck oil. So now we have money. So they decided they could afford to build a nice home. And they contacted renowned architect Frank Lloyd Wright to see if he'd be interested in the project. He was not, but he did have a colleague by the name of Robert Spencer Jr. that was interested in the project, and he's who designed the home. The windows in the house are unique because they were constructed in Frank Lloyd Wright's studio, and they are not leaded glass windows, but they are put together with brass spines. So that makes them unique. We did have a couple architectural students from the University of Wisconsin come through here a few years ago, and they were so excited because we are one of the few remaining places of Robert Spencer's designs that has the carriage house still intact. It does need some work, but I'm going to start prodding on that again. Next project. This evening was kind of a harebrained idea of mine back in the beginning of the year. This was something I wanted to do, and I would like to tell you why. I grew up in a family that liked to look at old pictures, talk about things. In fact, I am truly blessed that my mom and dad wrote volumes. This is one of 4. This is my dad's writing from the time he can remember as a small child until he entered college. And then he had other volumes that he wrote, college days, war days, so forth. My mother did the same thing. My dad was quite the writer. He did write for a couple magazines, but this was strictly just for us. And it was stated in there. And I would like to read something because I think it's kind of apropos to what we're thinking about this evening. My father grew up in Newton County, Kentland. Actually, he was out on the Iroquois River, so he was not a town boy. But this was his description of Kentland back in the mid-20s. Kentland had a five full-line grocery stores, each with full-line butcher. 3 were strictly independent and run by local families. 1 was a franchise operation of the Royal Blue trademark, an organization similar to the current IGA. In the early years, an A&P store opened on Main Street. This opening brought mixed reactions. This was a chain store owned by outside money and run by a brought-in manager. It was strictly cash and carry operation and was known for charging low prices. The other grocery stores all extended credit. I remember we ran a continuous credit bill at Bear's Grocery. All the grocery stores, excluding the A&P, bought eggs from the farmers. I suspect these egg sales were the principal way we made payments on our open line of credit. In addition to these, there was also a full-line bakery. There were 2 drugstores. Both of these had soda fountains where one could buy a 5-cent glass of Coke as well as an ice cream, 5 cents a dish. Okay. A glass of Coke as well as a ice cream, 5 cents a dish. On very rare occasions, a soda or sundae might be in order, 10 cents. I particularly remember that an esoteric concoction called a banana split was also made. I cannot remember ever having one. They cost 15 cents. There was Sharp's dry goods store, still in existence. Of course, Dad wrote this back in the early 80s. A men's clothing store, another general clothing store. Grandpa Coles ran the One Variety store. After the fire, a Ben Franklin variety store took its place. There was a hardware store, a jewelry store, 2 barber shops. One had a beauty shop where women could get a permanent wave in the back. There was a furniture store whose operator was the local funeral director. The funeral parlor was in the back room of the store. Funerals then were held either in the church or at home. There were 2 cigar store pool rooms. Card tables were located in the rear. Young kids simply did not go those places. This restriction extended through high school if you were from a family that had any standards at all. On occasion, I would go into the store to get Grandpa, who enjoyed playing cards on Saturday night. Sears and Roebuck opened its store in the big empty garage at the south of Main Street. This was a real addition and brought people from other towns to trade. It had an extensive line of hardware, farm and auto supplies, and those new appliances just being introduced: refrigerators, electric stoves, electric washing machines, and vacuum sweepers. The town also had 2 hotels, 2 newspapers, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, and a movie theater. There were 2 elevators, a feed mixing mill, 2 cream, egg, and chicken and egg buying stations, and 2 garages. There were 3 doctors and 1 dentist. He goes on to talk about other things about Main Street, which I have a feeling Main Street in Kentland was an awful lot like Main Street in Petersburg, Main Street in Attica, Main Street in Covington, Main Street probably all over the Midwest. We all have a heritage. I guess if there's anything I can say to any of us this evening, this is a treasure to me. Whenever I want to become reconnected with my family, I sit down and read these. I go through old pictures, and these are wonderful. If you don't know what to do in your spare time, write it down. Share it with your family. Write it down. This is our heritage. And this is part of why we're here tonight. I wanted, as president of Fountain County Landmarks, for all of us to get together and say, what was it like back when? What was it like in Attica? What was it like in Millard? What was it like in Newtown? What was it like in Cates, Petersburg? You know, we all live here, but we don't know. And I was hoping that we could all get together and share what it was like back when. And what my hope is, there are several people here that want to share what it was like. And I'm grateful to have you all here. And we all will take turns. I was a little concerned about the timing of things. So I have my little kitchen timer. So I'm going to time you all, and everyone will be allotted 6 minutes to talk, and then you'll hear a beep, and then, I'm sorry, you'll have to sit down for a few minutes, and it'll be someone else's turn. And then at the end, I think it would be neat to have question, answers, dialogue, or whatever. I did mention to many of you when I contacted you before this evening began that we are videotaping this evening. This is part of our history. We are trying to remember this, to keep track of this, to document this for future generations. So Brian Walker, bless his heart, is here this evening videotaping this. So when you speak, I would ask you to come up here. You may sit, but if you can, stand and talk to us about what it was like back when. I would like to first introduce Claudine Yerkes from Wallace. I have had the joy of talking to Claudine on the phone numerous times here lately, and I'm really looking forward to this. So, thank you, Claudine.
Well, I probably wish one to go first.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I do not remember this stuff. I have heard it discussed all my life. I chose the National Horse Thieves Association, the detectives, because I heard them talk about so much, and it really interested me. Now, back when this was started, it came into being about 1866. And you have to remember, the horse was everything to a family. It took them places in their wagons or their carriages, it plowed their fields, it just did everything. It's like our modern automobile. So, when people realized how valuable they were, they started stealing. And so that brought the onset of this association. It was a statewide group, which I didn't realize at first, and they would have secret meetings. And when they heard that somebody had something stolen, they would go after it. They would get on their horses and they'd run them down. So I found that very interesting. And they had rules. It was a statewide association. And their purpose was in arresting horse thieves, counterfeiters, incendiaries, and all other felons. So if you did any of those things, they were going to bring you to justice. And by the way, you know, it's followed the law. If they caught one, sometimes they just hanged him right on the nearest tree. And I found that a little interesting too. Now I'm doing Jackson Township. And the Jackson Township group was started in 1875. They had 25 members. I don't hear of anything great happening there, but they had their badges, they had their secret meetings, and you weren't allowed, if you didn't know the password or you didn't have your badge, you were not allowed in a meeting. And they usually met in school buildings, but they would trade their place where they met to keep it secret. It was a great secret back then, probably the worst kept secret in town. But anyway, I have some pictures here, and this is southern Fountain County and northern Park County. They met together, and they're kind of a ragtag group. So if anybody would like to see that. I also have an account, and I think this had been published by the Genealogical Society, of one thief that they caught. And they caught her over by Kate's. She had stolen a horse north of Montezuma and was on her way back to Attica. And they caught her, and they hanged her. But after they hanged her, they thought it was a man. But after they hanged her, her hat fell off, and she had long hair. It was a woman. She was about 30 years old, and her name was High. She was from Attica, and evidently her brother was in this group too. And I often wondered, after I read this, she couldn't do that by herself. She had to have an accomplice, so it was probably her brother. But when it all ended up, I guess there was a trial, and the attorney was Abraham Lincoln. He lost the case. So anyway, it said they had not found any evidence of a marriage for the surname of Hyde in Warren County or Myers. And so the search continues. Did you want to say something, Bob? Where's my time up? Anyway, I talked to Martha Glasscock, and this burial took place close to where Martha lives. And it was on close to the railroad right away, and when the new railroad came through, they moved it so many feet so that the grave would not be disturbed. I don't know why they were so concerned over a hanged person, but they were. And they had a small stone put there, and Hubert Glasscock took the stone because, and put it in one of his farm buildings. He was afraid of something happening to the stone. Well, they have now lost the stone. So I found that interesting too. But a man would come and care for the grave for several years. A man would come and care for this grave. And then evidently he passed away because now it is grown up with weeds and everything, but they do know where this grave's at. And another case I read about, and I couldn't find the article, was from Waytown. This farmer had quite a lucrative gang going. I guess he was a member of a gang, of the Horse Thieves Association, so he knew where every horse was. And he knew when they were going to be visiting. But he had a gang of his own, and he finally got caught and was brought to justice for stealing the horses there. So I find that a little bit interesting because it was a statewide association. They would meet. Okay.
Finish your sentence.
They would meet. The last meeting I have count of is Crawfordsville, and they expected 1,000 to come to.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I would like to introduce Mary Vogel.
I'm going to introduce her. Is that okay?
You do.
Well, we were trying to think of something that, like you, that not everybody knows about, and that is the Jewish community in Fountain County. And Attica had a lot of merchants that had come from Chicago, Russia, and there's a big cemetery in Attica of Jewish people set apart by itself, and some of the names that you will remember, I think, is Levi Loeb was born, and he was the first Jewish child born in Attica in 1856, and he was the oldest of 11 children. And most of them were merchants, and of course Loeb, one of the sons went on to Lafayette and had the Loeb department store, and I think most of you remember that. There was a hotel built in Attica called the Indiana House. It was on Perry Street between, it was south of Perry, west of Perry Street toward the railroad track, and it was built by Lahr, who went on to Lafayette and built the Lahr House. And the community was large enough that it had a synagogue in Attica that was on Main Street in one of our historic districts. And they had a rabbi, and the daughter of the rabbi was Rachel Lavore. And she was our first Citizen of the Year. They didn't call it that, but it was in the 30s, and her home was always open to anybody that needed help. And so they were a very important part of our community. And of course, I think most of us remember growing up, and Saturday night was the big night. We all went to town, and we'd go down early and park the car so that we'd have a good place to sit. And I thought, well, what about the other side of the picture? What about the merchants that received all of these people that came to town? So I call this Sam Newmark before Sam Walton. Miriam Newmark Vogel, of course, worked in her father's store. She and her husband ran it until I will have to tell the recent years. And Miriam is the last Jewish person that lives in the community. And I would like for her to tell us about their experiences as retail merchants in Attica.
As Carolyn is saying, Jewish merchants in small towns back in the 20s were fairly common. And in Fountain and Warren counties, those people were mostly my relatives. Our uncle, my dad's uncle, came to Newtown first and had a store there and heard about a man named Flagler down in Florida. Went to see him, what was going on there, liked it, came back and sold the Newtown store. Went to Florida and at one time owned 3 hotels in the South Beach district, which now is very, very famous and very profitable. And his Tides Hotel is still there. He let the rest of the family know that Attica and Williamsport and Petersburg, Pine Village, Stone Bluff, were all very good places to start a store. So in 1926, my dad came to Attica. I was 6 months old at the time, bought this store. At that time, my Uncle Max Newmark had a 5 and dime store across the street. All this is on Perry Street. My Uncle Sam Sharon had the Economy Grocery. I don't know if you remember the Economy Grocery, but he had some very innovative things there. He delivered, he charged, and that was one of the things that many of the merchants did, and it was a very bad thing because people didn't pay their bills very well. And cash flow was difficult. When my Uncle Max left Attica after having the Newmark department store for probably 40 years, the night before he left, he said to us, "Tonight we're going to have a $45,000 fire." We said, "What?" He brought the book, what were they called? Ledger. And stuck it in the fireplace and lit the fire. $45,000 worth of bills that people did not feel they needed to pay. It was just very fortunate that when Liz and I came to Attica in 1950, my dad had retired then, which is why we came. And we had this wonderful excuse when people came in to say that we were terribly sorry, and it was true. And Mr. Newmark is not here, and so there's no way that we can do anything other than just pay cash for this. And that was before, plastic, and it worked. We were able to do that, and because of that, we were able to stay in business for almost 80 years, which we did. Sam Sharon, Max Newmark had us across the street. Mo Nathan had a store very much like ours. If you don't know, we had a men's clothing and family shoe store, as did Mo Nathan, as did Louis Nathan over on the next corner. So other than the Jewish merchants of Attica, there wasn't a heck of a lot left. Saturday night, as Carolyn said, people brought their cars down and parked. It was almost as though they owned a particular parking space because they parked in the same place every Saturday. It was before people had more than one car in a family. So once a week is when a person came to town, and most usually that was Saturday, because the farm ladies had a wonderful farmers market in the basement of the Central National Bank. If you remember, fresh cream as thick as yogurt, a wonderful. You remember? Pearl tapioca. I don't know if you remember that. Pies, cakes, any wonderful thing that these super cooks knew how to make were down there in fresh eggs, all of that. And of course, you know how it is. Once you get started, everybody wanted to have the reputation of being the best baker in Fountain County or the best maker of this or that. And that food was absolutely wonderful. You could, a finest restaurant in New York wouldn't have had anything better than that. But that's the sort of thing that was true. People came to town with a lot of time so that they could visit with their friends. They went from one store to the other. It was more like a town picnic than it was a time to shop, although believe me, it was a time to shop. We made sure that we had enough clerks in the stores to take care of folks. People did not enjoy waiting. We had this wonderful thing to go into, when a person walked in the store, you went up to them. That was something that you just did.
Well, I grew up being raised that ladies come first, and we had two fine ladies. Marjorie. Marjorie Linville from Millar.
I'm entirely unprepared.
That's, you know what, I go through life that way.
Kathy had spoken to me about this quite a while ago, and I wasn't quite aware of how this was to be conducted. But I think I can do a little bit now. I'm 91 years old. I've lived in Moat all of that time. But during the time that my husband and I were gallivanting around during World War II. And one of the first things that I can remember, and I don't know whether Carolyn will remember it or not, was Miller's Garage. It was on the east side of the street, and I can see her grandfather standing in the door yet to this day, and Uncle Charlie Lewis, her grandmother's brother. Did Madge ever live in Moat?
No.
That was her mother. There was a beginning at the north end of town. There was a sawmill. There was another sawmill on east of town. This was way before my time. The railroad track came through the center of town. We have a young boy in high school now who's very interested in trains. The other day he said, "Margie, can you remember when the train stopped in Moat and picked up passengers and let off passengers?" I said, "Yes, I can." And now the track isn't even there. For the county history, Carol Ellis has been writing on ghost towns. The first edition of Moat was Rice edition, but she can't find out what Rice. I would like to know because I'm a Rice, and I would like to know. Another was the Reister edition. Reister was my maiden name. I know where that was located. I'm not sure where Rice edition was located, but Reister edition would be right near where I live now. I live right back of where the old school building used to be. So the Reister edition was right there in the south edge of town. Post office has been various places. One place was just in a grocery store with the boxes along the side of the wall. Then it moved from there into a building of its own right north of there. Wasn't there too long. Then moved up to the north of the railroad track on the east side of the road, where probably most of you remember where the last screen office was there in town. It was still in that building, and then the bank was in that building. I can remember this. When the bank closed, I was in bed with the measles. It was in the 6th grade. I had $100 in savings account in Newtown Bank. I can remember my mother and dad coming to the bed, standing beside the bed, and told me they were going to have to go get my $100. The bank was closed. I did all 12 years of school there in Moat. I managed the bank, the post office. There were 3 barbershops at one time. My mother had one of them. Can anybody think about offhand?
The telephone company was there. I remember
The telephone company.
And the restaurant across the street from Grandma's house, they had a bridge game going there practically round the clock, because when this was my Aunt Ruth that Marjorie knew, she loved to play bridge from the time she was a young girl, and she'd stand there and wait until somebody lost, and then she'd sit down and play, and as long as you won their hands, you got to stay. So she turned out to be a very good player.
This is a very, very personal thing that hasn't anything to do with Old Moat at all, that I have shared in the last few years with Carolyn. She mentioned her Aunt Ruth. Her Aunt Ruth was about 5 years older than I, and of course at that time, at that age, that's a great deal of difference. Later it isn't. My mother started giving me dramatic art lessons when I was 3 years old. I used to speak a piece at church. I can today still see the artificial watch that I wanted so badly. Mother bought it, and she showed it to me. But if I didn't speak my piece, Ruth Miller got it. And I'll tell you, when people talk about children, only children being spoiled, I don't know anything about it. Absolutely nothing. When I was promised something, I got it. I'm going to go ahead. And so, sure enough, went to church, I balked. I can take you to the spot yet, back to where that church, and show you where my mother gave Ruth Miller the watch. And of course, I just didn't want to take it from the little girl. And Mother said no. She says she's known from the start if this was going to happen. So we just got the watch.
I've always enjoyed sitting and talking with you, Marjorie. I remember one time just sitting right back down the hall. You told me something, yeah, I'm going to talk a minute. And this dealt with World War II and your sweet husband. That you said that you had a secret code between the two of you that he would say when you know, he would write a letter, because everything was all, you know, you couldn't say certain things in letters, it was all, you know. So he had a code that when he shaved off his, was it mustache, that meant he was on his way home. Oh, so, Bob Quirk from Newtown, would you like to come up and share?
6 minutes.
Yeah. I apologize for the rudeness of this, but I thought, you know, if it were me, we'd be here all night, so.
I just want to start out mentioning some of the things that happened in Newtown, and some of these I remember. One of the first big events that I remember was a state cornhusking contest in Newtown, and the state, and it was when I was 5 years old, and it was in the farm right next door to us, Quiggles Farm. And two things I can remember: the day before, my mom said I couldn't go down there by myself, and I thought, why not? I go there all the time. And then when I found out there was 20,000 people there, I could see why she didn't want a 5-year-old wandering around. And the other interesting thing, the winner of that was Lawrence Petzer from Attica. And that started him on his career of cornhusking. Okay, that was in 1932. In 1935, they had the National Cornhusking Contest there. And an unbelievable 125,000 people came to Newtown. I still can't imagine that. And I got to thinking not too long ago, 125,000 people, that's 40 or 50,000 more than go to the Super Bowl. And that came in and out of Newtown in one day. I could go on and talk a lot about that, but 6 minutes doesn't last long. So another thing I wanted to talk about were the schools. In Richland Township, in the late 1800s, there were 424 students in Richland Township. And there were 16 schools in the one township. And I can remember my grandmother saying she remembered when the two schools in Newtown went together, and there was a big argument there that neither one of them wanted to give up their school in Newtown. And then the next big consolidation, of course, was in early 1900s when they formed the school in Malott and in Newtown. And then after that, that was two schools lasted until 1941. In 1941, Malott and Newtown went together to form Richland Township. And there, I'm sure Marjorie can remember a lot of squabbling going on to get Malott and Newtown together. And I was a freshman in high school that year. And a couple of interesting things to me. The first year, when I was a freshman, we went down to Malott because they were working on the building. And then the next year, when I was a sophomore, we came back, and the thing that stands out in my memory, and I'm still upset about it, we didn't get to have a basketball team. Can you imagine today if they say we're not going to have a ball team this year? You see why I'm still mad about that. But then the next year, we did have vaulting, we weren't any good, but we had a team. And they had, of course, this was during the war. And whenever they were going to do jobs like pouring cement, things like that that required a lot of extra labor, the high school boys got out of school to work. We got 40 cents an hour. Of course, we'd have done it for nothing to get out of school. And so Richland Township then was formed in 41. And the one thing that really brought the township together, though, was 1950, when Richland won their first section. Okay, and when you look back on it, Richland Township only had a high school for 24 years, because in 1965, the next consolidation came along, and they became part of Fountain Central. So there went the high school out of Newtown, but the grade school was still there. And they were there until 1972, when they built the elementary at Fountain Central. So from having 16 schools in the township in the late 1800s to 1972, no high school. And it amazes me to think 424 students in Richland Township. 3 or 4 years ago, somebody figured out, and in Richland Township, there was only 3 seniors at Fountain Central in the whole township. So times changed. Okay, as I was growing up, there were 3 churches in Newtown, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Baptist. And each one of them were very thriving. They would have 70, 80, 90 every Sunday. And now we've got 2 churches, and they're struggling. Okay, one of the big things that Newtown was noted for then was the Newtown Band. The Newtown Band was really noted throughout the state. And the thing I think was really interesting about the band was the members of the band were just local farmers, businessmen, and so on. There was no professionals at all, but they became very famous. And one of the most important things they ever did was to, when Benjamin Harrison was president, they had a big deal in Indianapolis, and the Newtown Band was invited to play. And they sat on the stage, and when President Harrison came out, they were the ones that played Hail to the Chief. And one of my ambitions when I was a little kid was to get to be a member of the band because they got to play the Indianapolis 500 race. So finally, I got to be in the band, and that was the first year they didn't play.
You have, go ahead and finish what you're going to say.
I just got started.
Wait a minute.
Okay, I do want to think. 2 nights that were important when I was growing up in Newtown. On Thursday night, band concert night. And you could hardly find a place to park in Newtown during the night of the band concert. People came from all over there. And the other night was Saturday night when they had free movies. And people came from everywhere to see the free movies. The other thing I wanted to mention was no little league ball games or anything like that for the kids. But every once in a while I'd get a phone call and ask if I could come in town. They had enough guys that could play them a lot. And we would play them a lot. No umpires, no nothing, and I don't remember any arguments or anything. We just had a good time. Want me to quit?
Bob Shelby from Covington.
This is me to work.
No, I think it's all fascinating.
A lot of things back in the 50s that remember, of course, Covington, way back in the early times, this history, I remember the Wabash Area Canal. And later, on that Wabash Area Canal, there was the old Athens Jericho Railroad that came down from Attica on the old canal bed, and the depot was on down Washington Street. And that depot later became the Wabash Marine up on 136 that belonged to Warren Myers, and moved it up there and made a building out of it. He was there for many years, but that was the old depot. And I remember that when I was a kid, the train coming down to Covington. And 2 other things that goes back that I remember quite well was the old courthouse. I remember going downtown with my granddad and Dick, my older brother, when they were demolishing the tower of the courthouse. There was 2 little towers and the one big tower. and they were gonna blow it up that morning. And we watched from the window, the hardware was, at that time was, Mayer and Fry, not Fry, Faust, I'm sorry, it wasn't Fry, the lady. And we watched it, and when it went down, one brick went over on the north side and broke a window where Wallace Law Firm is now. The one brick from that thing went over there and broke the window. And that's the only problem we had, was they destroyed that. And of course, the new courthouse was built in 36-7. And I remember going down to the dedication because at that time, Granddad, Sam Dorn, was the president of the county council, and the Grand Lodge of Masons of Indiana laid the cornerstone, and going down there and watching that labor. And another person back there that I remember quite well because she's well known, I'm sure you folks have heard of Olive Caffine, who was the teacher at home for many years, and she died in 1940, I think about 44, along in there. But anyway, she belonged to the Presbyterian Church, and would always, after church on Sunday, we'd go down to the Courthouse Cafe to have dinner. And the folks, we'd be in there maybe, and after dinner, we'd take Miss Caffine home. She lived up on the corner of Washington, or not Washington, on Crockett and 8th Street. And the house is still there, it's apartments now. And another thing that's way before my time, but all I'd heard about was the old covered bridge that went across the river, and it went from Crockett Street over, and it burned in 1914, and they used a ferry to cross the river until a new bridge, which I imagine all of you remember, the old iron bridge was kind of narrow. People kind of didn't like crossing the media semi, it was a little narrow, not as bad as some. And it was blown up then when they put the new bridge in. And the new bridge, of course, was named for David Shout, who was a Marine Commandant under President John F. Kennedy. Another person that I remember, I don't know, some of you probably don't, but Aunt Katie Diffenderfer, who was the librarian of the library from the time it was opened in 1914, I think it was, along in there, until she retired in 1948. And I used to go to the library and sit with her over the evening sometime. She let me stamp the books for the people out. That was quite a thing, because she was my great-great aunt, and she lived to be 102 years old. That Covington, something that had happened through the years, the later years there, we had, I think it was about 46, we had a train wreck. One of the freight trains was going west and had stopped and was switching there at Covington when we used to get freight by rail. And another freight train come along and run into the back of it just west of Stringtown Road, which now is part of the trail. And anyway, the caboose, of course, they had stoves in there and lanterns, and it caught fire, and they had a fire on the train. And I remember they had the American French fire truck was fairly new, and a fellow taking it down in what was the old dump, because just west of Stringtown Road, there's houses built down there now, but that was a dump. That was all, that land was filled in with a dump. The fire chief, he just had a fit because that took the fire truck down there. The other thing I was going to mention that you remember, we had Congresswoman Hardin, and also later Congressman John Myers from Covington, which things kind of getting away. It doesn't seem like it's been that long ago that John was in there. And also, like the rest of them, Saturday night was quite the night for going to town, because each one had a new whether the persons were going to park, because that was their spot where they get in a family to settle on the steps there on the east side of the square and visit with one another, and the kids go to show wasn't too expensive, and I think about a quarter. And on Tuesday night, they had special at the show. You go for 9 cents. Well, of course, a lot of things around the well,
My father used to say that was also a big night for taking a bath. Jasper Fogelman from Petersburg. Come on up, Jasper.
I'll talk a little bit louder. I had a hard time hearing back there. This hung lady, let me get out of there. This hung lady, we can update you on that. We're pretty sure now her name was High, and her brother was defended by Abraham Lincoln. She apparently did not get married, but she took the name of Mary Myers, and she did leave the county, Park County, and came all the way up there. Those facts are pretty good. What we got now is the grave site has been fixed up by Mr. Price back here. There is a headstone, a cross, and so on there. And it's easy to get to. Everybody asks me, how can I go look at it? You go to Glasscock, is it Glasscock? Yes. Glasscock Implement, and you know how the road goes east and west, goes toward the implement, and then goes back east-west. Instead of going toward the implement, turn the opposite direction, and it's approximately a half, 3/4 mile down the road. How you find it is, you come down the road and you'll rise up over the old railroad tracks. And you'll know you're going up because you're going back down. The minute you get back down, turn to the right. There's a little field there, right down along the tracks, and there's an opening where somebody took the gravel out of the railroad bed and stopped right there, walk around along the fence about 50, 60 feet, and her grave is there. Now, it is true, we dug in some facts about the railroad, and the railroad, she was buried, by the way, she was not buried normally. They dug the grave approximately this wide, approximately 3 feet, put her legs down in it, and bent her back into it, and piled the dirt on top of her. So the grave will look small to you. And what we've done is, over the years, it has sunken in, and we keep putting pebbles on it to keep it built up. Mr. Price goes down there and checks it, adds another bunch of little rocks on it and so on, and it's easy to spot. The man that gave us the directions and spotted it for us was named John Allen. He still lives down there close to Case. So John Allen's identified that. Let's hear something from Stone Bluff. I haven't heard anybody mention it but once.
Okay, Stone Bluff. I'm sorry, I got a real glare here. Who's here from Stone Bluff? You want to come up? Yes. I figured as the evening moved on, we just kind of start talking. And I also want people to feel free, if you have questions or anything, do ask.
I think he really meant for my sister to do this.
Well,
she's the one that took the notes, and I get put up here. So
there you go.
We'll take her up right with you.
anyway, yeah. I was reading in Chris's little write-up about Stone Bluff, and as it turns out, supposedly the oldest home that was in Stone Bluff was called the Trading Post. As it turns out, I was born there at the Trading Post. They didn't trade me off, however. Maybe my sister wishes they did, I don't know. But anyway, my parents were John Raymond and Josephine Covald, and they owned that place. Then later they sold it to George and Gladys Hancock, and I don't know where they moved, but because I was too young to know, I guess. But anyway, Angus Minnick, which some of you know, his father Arch and his mother Goldie, lived in this. It was probably the largest home in Stone Bluff, and I think it's on the south side. It was at that time. I don't know directions too well, but I think it was on the south side. And that had belonged to a doctor. My dad told me that, and it was the home in that era. And it had 2 staircases, one for the servants and one for the regular family. Well, I guess when I was about 3, we lived in that home also. We lived in one side of it and had one of the staircases, and the Minnicks lived over on the other side and had the other part of it. The home was that big. And, oh, I don't know, there used to be, Stone Bluff, my dad told me, was larger than Petersburg in its heyday. And, of course, you know what it is today, just a pass-through. Don't blink your eyes, you'll be gone. Of course, it was home to me. We went to school there at the school. And one of the homes, it was called the Rimster home. And the Rimsters had married, the lady was a Meeker originally. And their daughter went to school. And I guess my dad told me all this, that she was not the best looking kid in there, and they were kidding her, teasing her, and she came home crying, and the mother says, well, you just go back there and you tell them your mother was a Meeker. Like this is going to do anything? I don't know whether she did or she didn't. But anyway, that home still stands at the corner there, and Darla 9, that works in the library, maybe some of you know her. She and her husband live in that home today. But that was the Rimster home when I was a kid in school. And
Is it true what they say about the gangsters of Chicago, how they used to come to Stone Bluff to hide out, let things cool down in Chicago for a while?
That's right.
I've heard all sorts of stories.
They were in this county a lot on the back roads.
Okay.
Because they used to say that about
Tippin Rock and that area.
In the paper that Chris wrote, that's what they did. If they did, I'm sure they did, but that was after my day, or before my day, and I don't remember anything about that.
Okay. That's probably good.
The old time maker.
I don't know. Have you got anything to add to this?
The old time maker.
I'm sorry, say it
They
again.
took a work fire to Oregon. And
You're telling me.
some of them crossed roads, but when I was a kid.
Did they have an opera house?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In my day, the Alexanders, it was an Alexander family, lived there. And I remember that specifically because my brother, who was in the military, had brought me a little ring back from France. And I had such a habit of playing with that ring. I'd take it off, put it on, take it off, put it on. And we were over there, and I lost the ring. And it went somewhere, and I looked and looked, couldn't find it. And Mrs. Alexander's granddaughter found it, but she didn't give it back to me. Well, I was kind of vindictive, so I enlisted my nephew, who was my sidekick, and we took her down the cornfield. And we left her. And we ran out because we knew that all you had to do was run up the rows and you got back out to the street. But she didn't know that, even though she lived there. So she got lost in the cornfield. Of course, I got your ring back. I got talked to strongly about that.
But you got your ring back.
No, I never did. She got lost in the cornfield.
Serves her right.
That served her right.
Thank you.
So.
I'm sure we have many other years that might want to share a story. Who else would like to come up and share a story? What?
I was thinking Mom, I forgot.
Okay. Anyone else?
Kathy,
Yes.
I don't want to, but I want Miriam to tell something. Miriam, remember the story about the shoe sales that your uncles got in a shoe sale war, but you gotta tell that story.
Go ahead.
Well, when Dad came to Alabama in 1926, as I said before, there were already 2 other men's stores exactly like ours. And one of them, the gentleman was not a gentleman, determined that Dad was not going to be able to stay. And so every day he would put something in his window, something. And in those days, if you had, we'll use Oshkosh overalls as an example. If you had Oshkosh, no one else in the town could have it. So he had a particular shoe, I can't remember the name right now, and we didn't. And so that shoe was a big deal, and he put that in the window at a ridiculous price. And Dad would match him with something from our store, and this was going on for quite a while. And finally, Dad decided that if they continued to do this, the 2 of them, they would be out of business in short order. So he called my Aunt Anna Kahn, who had a wonderful store up in Wisconsin, who used to have a store in Petersburg, but left Petersburg because a cross was burned on their lawn. And it happened in those days. And it was the best thing that Clan ever did for them because they were very successful. And accidentally on purpose. Anyway, Dad called my Aunt Anna at her store in Wisconsin and said, Anna, I need 500 pairs of whatever that shoe was. I can't remember the name of it right now. Something like that. And she said, when do you need them? He said, yesterday. I'll meet you in Chicago tonight. And so Dad took a truck and Tonky brought the shoes and the exchange shoes. And at the next morning, Dad had a window filled with those shoes at some silly price, $1, $2, something. And that brought that gentleman across the street in one heck of a hurry. How could you possibly? And Dad said, look, you and I have been at each other's throat now since I moved to town. I'm telling you that I am in business here, and I'm going to be in business here. Now, can we stop this silliness? And at that point, they did.
Brian, I have a question for you. Can you read and write Hebrew?
Can you read and write Hebrew, Marion?
Oh, no. I do understand Yiddish. I can't write it. Well, Yiddish actually is written in English.
Do you know anybody living in Attica that can read it?
Perhaps the Catholic priest. The Catholic priest, perhaps. Might.
Jerry, Paula Hoagland over in Hillsborough can write and read Hebrew. If you need someone who does that, she does it. She's even got a computer that does it.
They have a headstone at the Jewish cemetery in Attica that is written in Hebrew. I would like to know what it says.
That is an old cemetery too.
Where is the Hebrew cemetery located in Attica?
It is the middle.
You know what you said? It's what?
Right there at Riverside.
Riverside?
The Catholic, Jewish, and
General side, from the middle and the south, is the Jewish cemetery, and right south of that is St. Francis the Catholic. They're all right there.
Right there?
Right there.
Okay. Interesting.
Did you get the information?
Paul Hoagland from Hillsborough.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I mean about where the cemetery was located.
Yes, near
All
Riverside, south of Riverside.
Well, it's on Perry.
Another point, if somebody would like,
Perry,
South
okay.
Perry Street.
South Perry Street.
if somebody would like to know where any of these cemeteries are, we now have addresses on them, even the German cemetery, which we just found. We have addresses and GPSs on them. And if we don't know about the cemetery, let me know. I'll go look at it, we'll GPS it and get an address. But don't send in letters because nobody will write back.
At the present time, I am in the process of putting in a monument at Hangman's Curve. The name I have is M. Myers. If there's any objections to that.
There's a point about my dad. Some of you knew my dad. I think he was born in Ireland. And he came here. He'd been at sea for 14 years. He'd never been on a farm in his life. And he came here and started a farm. He knew nothing. And he couldn't have gotten along without the help of our neighbor. And to me, that's the key to everything around here, not only Risston Township, but Fountain County. How the people work together to help each other. One story that Dad told about himself, though, was, and I've heard many other people tell about him, he came here and he said when you were at sea and you wanted to tow another boat, you looked and got a long rope because you didn't want it close to you. Okay, so my grandfather told him one day, this wagon needs some repairs, to take it into town to get it fixed. And so he looked up and found a long rope. And he tied it on back to another wagon and started into town with that other wagon about 20 feet behind him. And he had a hard time living that down. But the key to the whole thing is they did it in a good-natured way. And I have thought many times lately how our neighbor, Mr. Quiggle, helped him because things would come up, he had no idea what to do. And he'd go and ask Mr. Quiggle and he would help him out. And he could never have done anything in farming without the neighbors. And I think that's what the whole thing about it in Fountain County is, people help people.
Very good. Thank you. Anybody else have something they would like to add?
I'm going to say, Mom talked about the corn husking over there, 35, I remember that, I was just a kid. And Dad leaving early morning because they were laying out all the ones to take ambulance over there because all the people would be there, they wanted ambulances there and they were stationed different places around the area. And grandmother took Dick and I over there to see the thing. Like you say, little kids, you never saw so many people, right, Bob?
Right.
Quite a crowd, and parked a good ways away, but it was quite a thing over there to see that back in those days. And like you said, now it's far different how they harvest the corn than they did then. All by hand, shucking, paying on their hand, and really going to town down through the field, throwing. They had a backboard on the other side of the wagon that they threw it up against.
Bob, you didn't mention the Wabash Moon.
Huh?
You didn't mention the Wabash Moon.
But like you say, you only had 6 minutes of anything. I didn't mention as far as downtown, what was around the square like this Saturday night. I don't remember Oh, yeah, they have a place on the east side where they park certain ones, and I can remember Roy Rogers and J.T. Myers, who you knew, and J.T. and Roy Rogers and them were neighbors out east town, and they parked a certain place on the east side of the street. The Andersons and from down Perrysville, and sister, brother-in-law, the Wilsons from down towards Stringtown, they always parked on the south side about in front of the furniture store. And I remember one couple from down south of town at that time, Jess Smith had a tavern on the corner right east of the furniture store there. And this young couple, they parked right along there about the last space or so on Liberty Street. And their little boy, they had one child, he'd sat on the stone out in front of the tavern or in the car, and they'd go in the tavern and be there about all evening with the little kid. He sat out front. And mother sure couldn't do that today. Please, they'd be after. But a lot of things Saturday night, and like I say, the Wabash Moon was over on the west side of the square on the north, very north thing, next to the filling station. And that was quite a place, the Wabash Moon, and all the young kids enjoyed, went there and danced and all, and it was quite enjoyable. In fact, Frank Youngblood, I think, was the last one that had the Wabash Moon, and it was done away with probably in the late 40s.
Jim Crane went there when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Do you remember Robert Dale?
Robert Dale Auger, of course, was a fixture. He was blind, and he had this little stand in the courthouse, and couldn't see, but you walked up and say something, he knew right who it was from the voice and all. He kept his radio there, and he listened to, at that time, a lot WDAN. We didn't have all these other stations, but listened to WDAN mostly all the time, to the news and different things on the radio going on. And of course, they had the basketball games on the radio. And he had this little radio that he'd carry around with him. And got to tell you, one Robert Dale, good. Of course, he couldn't see. And this old fellow there, well, he used to clean for my grandmother that lived down on the corner of Union and 6th Street. And name was Walter Gray. But Walter, he cleaned for people, like I say, he'd come and clean the house in the spring, beat the rugs and all that. But he, after the prohibition was gone, he liked his beer and would get drunk. Well, one night, Robert Dale was downtown, and well, he was drunk and couldn't find his way home. Well, come on, I'll take it. And Robert Dale took him right down home. He was Robert Dale
My mom and dad had the courthouse buffet, and Robert Dale would come in up there all the time. Now, I was like 4 years old. I went out on the street, and he had his little cup of water, and I took money out of his cup. Oh! Stole from him, blamed him. And went back in, and Mom went back, made me go back and tell him what I'd done. Oh, that was the worst thing. That stopped me from ever taking anything.
They cured that.
Yeah, that was bad. And I would bet money that he knew exactly who it was, just because he could tell the. There was a Mr. McCann. I don't know if anybody, he'd come in and he'd eat peas on a fork, and I thought that was really fascinating. That's all. And I draw pictures for him.
Yes.
I know that most everybody here has the 1983 Fountain County History book, but there is a new one being published by the Genealogy Society, and if there is anything that didn't get in the other history book that you think should go in there, I really think it's important.
Well, and Christy Kruger's here tonight, and she's working on the section on Van Buren.
She can tell you a lot more about it, but
do you want to say anything about what we're doing here with the genealogy?
I just think it's great. I think it's generating a lot of interest in history. And Kim Martin's here. She's doing the Troy Township and a couple other townships. And Marjorie's been helping us do research. We're really working hard on it. So we appreciate everybody's information and help. You know, how you can get. And even if it was in the 1983, we'll still take it and put it in the new one too.
Anyone else have something they want to add? Go. And then we're going to wrap it up.
I have one statement to make
Okay.
about Pat Bush. Wrote a history of Silver Island, Silverwood, and Lodi. My father came to Lodi about 1916, but his mother had lived down on the Wabash River in the old ferry house since about 1900. When my father and mother got married in 1917, he was working as an engineer for the Neil Gravel Company, running the steam engine that switched the cars to the Nickel Plate Railroad. She has it that everything pulled out in 1915. I'm telling you, it didn't. Les Warnick was the superintendent, and when my dad built the elevator at Newport, he come back to Cayuga and built the tipple for Neil Gravel Company. And Les Warnick ran it until about the 1970s.
I'd like to say one thing.
Yes.
My great-grandfather was back in the war of 1812, and he got land given to him, 80 acres, land where my house is now, where I live.
Really?
But he married Margaret Keeley and moved back there in 1829 with his family. And my grandfather was born on a farm, and my dad was born on a farm. And I wasn't born on a farm, but all my siblings were born there. My dad lived on a farm 1 year in 1919 when I was born, so I missed the farm for a while.
Where is that?
It's just north of town, up on Maple Street, in Maple Street. Used to be Butch Road, my dad built that road. They was superintendent on it and took care of it for years. But they changed the name.
Talk about Silverwood, Matt. Several little towns like that used to be around the town. I just wondered, and you remember her, and if you know where Vicksburg was? Of course, down on this side of the river, south of Perrysville, where the river makes a bend back to the east. Like you said, Silverwood across the line into Lodi. I'm trying to think the other day, I thought of another little one, of course, still there, but behind Kate's much difference in it. Used to be at the railroad and 3 or 4 stores and 2 churches. And the one now has got 1 church, no post office, and no stores or anything, just some houses.
You talking about San
Yeah, Kate's.
You think that there's anything there at Vicksburg that you could even see that there was a town there? You think it's just all gone now?
There's some houses right in there, still 2 or 3 houses right along Vicksburg, I think. I'm down there, or you just kind of,
Well, I've been down there quite a bit, and there's a little house there, and it kind of looks like a little garage in there, and I thought that was about where it was.
Yeah, it's down there, the house is right part of Vicksburg sets back just a little ways towards the river. The river down there makes it curve real close to the road where Vicksburg was. And
See, that's something we're working on, are the ghost towns of Fountain County, like Palmertown, Nebaker Station.
No, well,
what about Shelby
Shelby and
Springs?
the old Indiana Mansion Shelby used to be on, which was my great grandfather had a granary was set on the canal and then later on the railroad that went through.
About Henbeck.
Was there anything in Graham? Pardon, Graham. There is, on an old map that we have, we live out between Petersburg and Milan. There's a spot on the map that's called Graham. We don't know if it was just a railroad crossing or if there was something there or.
That's Graham Township.
Okay. So Mark and I used to say we live in beautiful downtown Graham.
Yeah. But is it Van Buren Township?
I think
That's Van Buren, isn't it, still? Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if any of you looked at that map that's in the courtroom, the courthouse. I have a map just like it. In fact, mine's in better shape than that. I was gonna take it to Minneapolis to get it restored, and never did. But I have a map of the same year. I don't know why I didn't realize it, but Petersburg is not even on there. Petersburg didn't exist yet when that map was made. Chambersburg.
1872.
And,
1872.
I don't remember whether Newtown was even there
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
A lot wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
And did Petersburg originally have an H?
Did Petersburg?
H on the end?
Yeah.
Because we've got bricks out at our place that say Petersburg with an H.
There's two brick yards in Petersburg, all brick, Petersburg, Clinton.
I was surprised.
What was the name of the
That Mr. Veeder was buried in Africa.
Yeah, I know.
one down south?
He got tired of
That old man's me, he went down.
Oh, thank you all for coming out tonight. We could do this all night. In fact, frankly, I would be fine with it, but I know some people do want to get home before dark. So, thank you.
Busy all night.
There you go. Thank you all for coming. We do have refreshments in the dining room, and I do encourage you to stay and visit with each other and continue with the dialogue. So, have a safe drive home. Do join us.